All right, I am Jason Truding. I play in percussion, and this is the Brooklyn Bound podcast, of which this is the third of the three sets that are happening on Thursday, August 27th. It's going to be the first time we're doing a Brooklyn Bound kind of virtually, and these are the first set of podcasts. I guess we're still going to call them podcasts, even though they're videos now. And I'm very psyched to have Phong Tran and Darian Thomas of MEDIAQUEER here with me right there and there. How are you all?
Great. We're great, yeah.
You all are, I feel like there are many sub connections. And actually, Phong, I just learned about a new sub connection that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know about, I think. But Darian, we met at So's Summer Hang, SOSI.
Yes.
A couple years ago, 2018.
18?
So yeah, just a couple years ago. That's pretty insane.
Yeah.
Feels like longer.
Yes.
in a good way, in a really good way.
Yeah.
And Phong, I think learned from Joe Barry, who's a SOSI alum who's going to be on this same thing, that I think you had written a piece. You were going to be a SOSI composer.
Oh, yeah.
And then said, like, get me out of here. This doesn't seem so cool.
No, it was literally, I like fully intended on going to So, and then like, I think like a couple weeks before literally leaving, I got hired for like a full-time job. This is like right after I graduated from my master's. I got a full-time job at Boozy and Hawks. I was like, crap, like I start literally a week before I leave. I can't like just start a job and then take 2 weeks off.
Yeah.
Like they're not gonna let me do that. So
I think it was probably a good call, but I'm bummed that we didn't meet in that scene, though I'm very happy to have met through this duo. You all share our space when our space is shareable. Can you guys help? I'm terrible. There's a name to the kind of ensembles we've had in residence, many of which have been cool. Is there a studio? Are you the Sub Percussion Studio Residency Extraordinaires? Is that the official title?
We can make it that.
There's been, I feel so, there's been amazing folks have been in residence. Lucy and Resonant Bodies and Dither and Talk and I'm going to forget somebody and you all. So there's many ways that we run into each other. And most recently you guys sat in on one of these Amid the Noise from Quarantines that we made, which was amazing. So thank you all for doing that. Like I said before we push record, these podcasts, there's kind of 5 questions that I ask everybody. I guess it's a way to make sure these feel somewhat similar, but everybody who speaks to me and everybody who's on Brooklyn Bound is very unique. So I imagine the conversation is going to go wherever you all want it to. But the first one is the broadest, most annoying question ever that either of you can start to answer pre-MEDIAQUEER, this band's moment. What was your path into music? What's your path from 0 to 20, whatever? We can go in alphabetical order or reverse alphabetical order, whichever you all prefer.
Oh, so many options. Phong, go first.
I mean, I got my start in music in like middle school band. I was like a trumpet player in band, and then just like playing like video games and stuff. I really thought I wanted to be like a video game composer and kind of just fell in through that route. And then I got into new music in undergrad and then kind of just fell through that hole. And then I think I like did that all through my master's. And then I think immediately after my master's, I was like, what am I doing? So now I'm like super jaded with like the idea of new music in general. So I'm just kind of like figuring out like, cool, how do I take all of that and then do whatever it is we're doing now?
Yeah, new music is that's a hard, like when you talk to anybody who's not in whatever this niche is, like all the music they listen to is new music. I mean, like you just listen to music and that is most oftentimes music that's created in this moment. It's a funny genre descriptor. But so when you went from, I love that it was video games because that's just like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I was playing video games for sure, but I'm not sure if folks my age were like, I want to be video game composer. They were like, whoa, this thing exists. You know what I mean? Like, boop. Like the idea that was like a real in is pretty amazing. But then where did that, you mentioned before we were hanging suburbs of Atlanta in Georgia? Like, where were you going to undergrad and grad, and where was your path?
Oh yeah, I did my undergrad at University of Georgia, and then my master's at NYU. So that's how I ended up in New York.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. And you stayed.
Yes.
Are you in New York right now, or have you?
Yeah, I'm in Bushwick right now in Brooklyn.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Holding down the fort. I went back to our space in Brooklyn, where these shows would usually happen, for the first time in 5 months the other day. Mostly to get some gear to bring back here to record. I moved a Rhodes out of our space on my own. I was like, I am going to get this into my car because I want this in my house to be able to record on the next few months.
That takes work.
But it took work.
Yeah.
And if I woke up the next morning feeling like, I was like, I have aches and pains. Maybe I have COVID. And Beth was kind of like, no, you're 43 and you moved to Rhodes. So
wait, did you move it by yourself?
I did. I was.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, I was like, I need this at home in Princeton. So Darian, I think you have Texas in your path.
Yes.
What was your path? Did you grow up in Texas?
Yeah. I've been in Texas pretty much the whole time until moving up here in I guess 2019, early 2019, early 2018. Music's always been in my family. It's kind of like a almost generational thing. There's like this saying about the previous name of my father's side of the family that goes like, the Baileys are always one of two ends. They're either ministers or musicians. And for the past 3 generations, we've been musicians. So that's kind of a funny thing. So it's felt like it's always there. I just didn't really settle on a thing until middle school, also through orchestra. And honestly, it's really not like a fancy thing. I just wanted to. My middle school had this thing where they were like, you have to take PE every year, or you can take a fine arts elective and postpone taking PE until later. So in 6th grade, I was like, well, obviously I'm not going to do physical education right now. I can't get out of that. And I was watching The Red Violin with my mom at the time, and I was like, that could be funny. Let's just see what that. And I was like, Mom, which one is violin in? She's like, the orchestra, I think. And I was like, sick, we're doing that. Nice. And that's how I started playing.
Which one's the red violin? I need the red violin.
Yeah, exactly. Right, yeah.
That's a great one.
Yeah, and then I don't know, I didn't really take it seriously until, I loved it, but didn't really want to pursue it until freshman year of high school. And then I accidentally went to the same high school as an actual prodigy, person who, when we were both 16, she had already played with a couple professional symphonies in China, a couple professional symphonies in Europe, already done the Sibelius competition, Tchaikovsky competition, and I was like, okay, that's my competition. I don't want to compete with that. I would rather compose, because I was already composing by the time and enjoying it. And that's what my dad did. He was a producer and music engineer and stuff. So I was like, okay, I'll just write. That's what I'll pursue in school.
Yeah.
And then I did. I went to Manus for a semester, but it was way too expensive. So I came to New York, then went back down to Texas, finished at no name school. Last year, I accidentally joined 8 bands and started doing electronic music, and then I moved to New York 2 years later.
I like the accidental. I like the accidental part of that. How was it accidental? So I was like, that sounds cool. That sounds cool.
It kind of was. I mean, it's sort of the same thing as if I say I started playing violin accidentally, but I kind of did, because the main goal was just not to take PE. And then now we're here. Well, with the 8 bands thing, there was a concert that my youth orchestra was doing. It's a pretty standard thing with a cool twist, which is where you take an album and orchestrate it, right? So the youth orchestra covers this album. We were covering OK Computer. But the cool twist was that our conductor wanted to invite local bands to cover the song also.
Oh, cool.
With the orchestra as accompaniment. And his thought was that would be a way for the youth orchestra to be more involved in the local music scene to feel like they have access to these classical musicians who are coming up and exploring. And it worked very well. Case in point, I accidentally joined 8 bands over the course of one rehearsal.
So that band sounds good. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and we were all just like, you're cool. I guess I'm playing with you now. And then I was really busy.
Yeah. But from from what I know about you, Darian, that feels like that didn't stop, that didn't necessarily stop, and that's a defining trait in the best way, isn't it? So before, like in older original have either of you guys met a percussionist named Doug Perkins? He was originally in he's a great guy, but he used to always, I think, on a dig on me a little bit, he'd be like, oh right, Jason's just starting a side project with one of his friends. It would be like, that would be the it's like, oh, you're really cool. I've never met anybody who thought, let's do this thing. It would just be like a way to like hang out and do cool shit. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So, in some ways, I guess this is the second question, but so how does MEDIAQUEER start? Like, because I was thinking, so before you both were thinking about coming to SOCI, and Fong decided the more professional route, and Darren was like, oh, I'm here.
I so regret that too. I was like, what did they do?
No, totally joking. Like, did you guys know each other already, or would that have been your meeting?
We met through Zoom. I just remembered this as Darian was talking. I was like, this is the first time that I've seen Darian on like a Zoom call, because we just like text each other all the time. I was like, I haven't actually seen you on Zoom since the last time we met, which was through the New Amsterdam Composer Lab.
Yep.
Which was on Zoom?
Yeah, this was like years ago. I was like, we both got into this, like, what is this Zoom thing they want us to download? This is dumb.
Yeah. Wow, but that's so. What year is this?
So years ago, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I know that because it actually, what's this word? Covered? Sure.
Coincided?
Yeah, with my move to New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I first got here, I was like, I know 3 people in New York: William Patel, Andrew Nosworthy, and Fong Chan. So I'm going to be their best friends forever, and that's kind of how we met.
Oh, that's so good. It's funny. I feel like I discovered Zoom like in like February, just to have something, and then the world, like everything happened on Zoom but you guys were like way on the front end of this wonderful and strange and terrible technology, both things that you met on Zoom. This is wonderful. Okay, that's great. And you guys were both hanging at the New Am, like, community, I forget what they call that cool thing. And you could just tell that you had similar.
Yeah. We kind of both just vibed with each other's work. And then Darian said that he was moving up here. So you're like, oh, we need to hang out. We need to like play together. We need to do stuff. And then MEDIAQUEER just kind of sprouted from that.
Yeah. I mean, the whole point of that, well, no, that's not fair, but it's true. Like a major point of that lab, the New Am Composer Lab, is to explore how, is to explore how composers are interacting with like a post-genre aesthetics, I guess, or like how they're pulling from all these different spaces and really putting all musics on equal playing field. So there was like a lot of talk about monotracks. Shit, what's this genre called? Sorry, darn.
Vaporwave.
You're okay.
Yeah. Yes.
I love that you were bleeping yourself. We'll go back and do that later, Darian.
Artful bleep, please. Something Tristan Parrish.
Anyway,
just extremely loud. Just like the most loud, obnoxious bleep. Like, compress that.
Fuck both of you. There are no bleeps.
Clearly you haven't heard MEDIAQUEER. My goodness.
Oh my god, that's what we need to do as our next thing. We need to go back and take Into and just bleep everything.
Oh my god, you're right. Sorry, we're in a meeting right now. Please, it's on. Goodness.
We're in a Zoom meeting.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, so we there was a lot of talk about like vaporwave and other genres and stuff, and a lot of discussion of metal, jazz, which not my field, but like it was kind of easy to tell which composers vibe with each other's aesthetics more, I guess, and we're coming from similar places. I think we even touched on video game music during that, probably.
Oh yeah.
And I were like, oh yeah, same.
Yeah.
It
was
very cool.
Like there was like one whole session just on vaporwave, and then that was like the people who got it were like, oh, I vibe with these people, because like vaporwave is kind of my obsession. That's like the thing that I like latched onto after I graduated, or even like while I was in school. I was like, oh, this is a thing that like it on the surface feels like it's just like a fad, but it's kind of just for some reason resonating with me deep at my core level.
Wait, so one of Trick's point never is that I always forget that's vaporwave.
He kind of like was one of the original people with it. He had a project under a pseudonym called Chuck Person, called Chuck Person's Echo Jams Volume 1.
Awesome.
And it was just like slowed down, remixed like 80s synth pop jams. And then, because he couldn't actually properly release any of that, it was just like a series of cassette tapes that kind of just found their way onto the internet.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing. I remember, so I never go see live music because, did I mention I'm 43, got 2 kids, hard to see live music. So whenever So plays festivals, it's just like, I'm going to see everything that's here. Like touring is my chance to like just check shit out, right? And so at Big Ears, he was playing a set, and it was amazing. And I had heard some stuff recorded, I'd never heard it live, but I think I just never, like, I never knew the subgenre or never knew the specifics of it. But so you all, in many ways, you discovered, you guys were on the same page, let's jam. You moved up to New York, or you were in New York, and you got together and started making music together.
Yeah, that's the TLDR, yeah.
Amazing. And so what was the process is, I mean, you are both composed. So you, within MEDIAQUEER, you co-compose, you collaborate, you, however you, right? So what are we, let's use this as the question maybe. What are you playing on, or what are you presenting on the Brooklyn Bound set, on your Brooklyn Bound set, and how did that music come together?
I think,
or are you still choosing what's going on the Brooklyn Bound set, and therefore you can just guess how it came together?
Well, I mean, I think stepping back just a little bit, I think like the impetus for like why we wanted to do MEDIAQUEER and why we're called MEDIAQUEER was that we wanted to make like this intersectional thing between the visual work that we both do and the music that we both do. And then I think this is like kind of one of our first really deep dives into actually making that like cross-discipline thing. And then I think when we recorded this, like I'd spent a couple months back in Georgia right when COVID started, and then I'd just come back like last month or so. And then this was like right after I'd finished my 2-week isolation period, and like I hadn't seen Darian in months. So it was like, this is like kind of like a homecoming-ish rehearsal, but everything kind of still feels wrong. So I think that's kind of where the piece came from, of like figuring that space out.
You mean the world feels wrong, but
it's
here feels.
I mean, we definitely had a conversation when we first met up to practice, because I was already very stressed again. Because all of a sudden, like over the course of the past, well, now it's been 3 weeks. As of the time that we met, over the course of the last week before we met for our rehearsal, it felt like everyone decided all of a sudden, like, oh, we have to do things again, and was starting to reach out about a lot of deadlines, a lot of getting stuff online, shifting around of like drafts of pieces, and starting to do these online rehearsals. And I was just like, what's happening? All of a sudden, like I've gone from almost 6 months of doing kind of literally nothing, which was beautiful, to having all this work to do all at once. And I was expressing the phone, I was like, I wanted the world to open back up. I just didn't expect it to go like 0 to 60 in 1 second. And that doesn't feel right. Also because like the ways of producing content are extremely different now. Like no one's doing work in the same way as before. So there's also that taxing side of it where it's like, I have to figure out a new way to do all these things.
It's
in addition to having to do them.
Sorry. It's also that like, I think not necessarily people are doing things differently, but it's like people are still trying to do the same things that they were before COVID, but just online now. And I think Darren and I both knew that like, that's not what we want to do here. Like we kind of want to fully embrace like, this is the new reality, and like, how do we abuse this format? And like, how do we like make the most out of this thing? Like, you know that we're not doing this live. Like, you know, like this is a pre-taped video, that this is a like like concrete kind of thing that we are like putting out here. So why not just fully dive onto that? Like, why do we want to just like have a video of us playing? Like, we don't. There's so much more to explore there than just that.
Well, I feel like you all like, because the visual element is part of the thought. It's part of the band to begin with, right? You're exploring
Right.
both pre-COVID. That's part of the band. So it feels like you're almost like set up in a great way to exploit that side of what this way of music making is, as opposed to, like, I know, so we took a second to feel like, wait, what's our, like, we're not just going to set up in Brooklyn and live stream like it's, that's not what we want to do, but what do we want to do? Oh, wait a minute, we do have this way of working that is more layering and remote collaboration. We just haven't tapped into it for a while or whatever. But it seems like in some ways, these things that this moment kind of is looking to exploit, you all have that pretty deeply ingrained in who you are as a band.
Yeah.
Definitely. And when we also, during that first rehearsal, I was talking to Fong about the video, and I was like, we're probably going to make this like not a performance video at all. He was like, thank God.
Yeah. I was going to have to quit the band if you...
It's done with, like, I mean, I don't know. I'm a musician who is very active in our field, and I'm not interested in seeing people perform on video. Like, I don't want to watch you play something, honestly.
Yeah.
Unless, I don't know, there's just very rare instances where the piece is really short or something. It's just like, the beautiful part of all this is that now musicians are having to really confront their visual aesthetic and figure out, like, how do you look? And what does it look like when you're presenting something? Because I think for the longest time, people got away with not caring about it and almost demonizing it, right? Like, there's this idea of if you're too flashy or whatever, it's distracting from the music. And it's like, well, okay, whatever. Also, like, performance is a multi-sensory experience. So, like, fuck that idea. Because that's not how it should work. And now that everything is actually digital, it's even more so the case, where it's like, music is very important. The sound is so important. Cool. But also, you have to consider how it's being presented. It's a total art. You just have to take into account these other parts of it. Which is where the final product kind of came from. I mean, we did a bit of improv to get used to each other again and get used to playing with other people again. And then found a couple ideas, decided to come back the next day and record them. And then we did. And then Fong showed me some of his programming that he's been working on recently. And I was like, oh, this is beautiful and perfect. I'm going to use these probably in like juxtaposition with some other elements that I'll find somewhere else and make the video out of that. And probably like the video of us performing will be a very small part of the screen, like somewhere on the corner or something. Which I favor, because it's like, fine, if you need to see that we're performing it, it's over there. But also it's like totally under a lot of layers and really not the point. The point is like this experience that's happening for you right
now. I remember kind of like going through it and I was like, this feels like kind of a nod to like a Twitch gamer stream moment where it's like, yeah, the large picture is like the content of the thing, and then the streamer themselves kind of just like takes up a corner of the screen and is just like, they're mostly just kind of there to make sure, you know, like they're interacting with the chat. And it it felt very much like of that time. Yeah.
Do you have are both of you gamers, or does one of Fong, are you a gamer?
Yeah.
Or you just no. I mean, because I found like that as far as the experiencing music right now, right? Like to me, I've been surprised the few things that So has done, mostly through Soci and through like some watch party ideas. The idea that the chat is such an important part of the experience, and feeling really, really like it's a necessary part of feeling that there's a group of people committed to experiencing this in the same moment, and they could experience it on their own at any other moment, but we know that we're experiencing it together via the chat. And you know, I've been surprised at how much that's been speaking to me in this moment, because if you're not feeling like you're experiencing it with other people, that's like kind of what I feel like a concert is versus a listening experience at home, right? It's the togetherness of it. But the idea that there's an analogy in game, like the gaming is that too through chat.
Oh yeah, gamers have figured this out like forever ago.
Yeah.
They're like Twitch. Like I think that's the thing of like live streaming. Like gamers took that over, and then they figured out like, cool, whoever's performing this thing actually needs to have some sort of emceeing skills and like engage an audience as they are doing what they are good at doing. Like on top of that, it's like, you know, like if someone was live streaming a performance of just like another piece, it's like yeah, that is the thing that you're making, but then like what are you doing to also like actively engage with the people who are at their computers right now? Because otherwise it's so easy to just like, cool, I'm gonna pop that on and then I'm gonna throw that on there while I make dinner, or I'm gonna throw this on that while I'm doing this other thing. But like if someone's talking to you as they're doing the thing, like that means you can talk to them. That means that you're engaging with the content that they're making.
Yeah. This new way of like directing energy, right? Which I think you have to consider when performing, and which for me personally, I got like way better at after I started doing performance art, which like was always involving these acts of stasis. Honestly, it's like, how do I stay kind of the exact same way for 3 hours, but really make sure that people have to look at me? And it's weird. You have to like conduct energy in a certain way, and I feel like that kind of informs this. And it's the same thing with like Twitch streaming, and you just have to figure out, how do I conduct energy through this medium, knowing there's someone like an incomprehensible distance away from me, but interacting very closely in the realms of this like screen, you know. Which I don't know, maybe this is why I've always been against people villainizing like social media and screen time and all this stuff. It's like, dude, if it's part of our life, it's part of our life. I'm kind of not into saying like, you should not be blah, 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 back in our day, whatever. And it's like 12-year-old saying this. And I'm like, dude, calm down. Like the internet, it's here. It's very much a part of our life. Screens exist. Now they're even more a part of our life. And also they can be really beautiful and useful if you just commit to what they actually are. And if you like grow into what they can be used for. I think this process of trying to use them in an antiquated way of like an old VHS camera, it's like, well, then just use a VHS camera. It would be more compelling because it's built for that. But if you're using a computer, use a computer.
Like there's so much possibility there to like do weird, crazy things that engage with people on that. And I think it's just so unexplored right now.
Well, what I love about it, I feel like when we were talking about whatever we define our scene as, but when I'll say for myself, when I define the scene that So's a part of in more the kind of new music, classical side of it or whatever, it feels like you're right, Fong. I think you had mentioned, or no, maybe you did, just that like sometimes you think about it, it's all about the sound. It's not about the way it looks, right? And to me, that means you're not really thinking about the audience, right? You're thinking about this thing in some abstract thing that the audience should learn to appreciate or whatever. But I do feel like the right amount of thinking about the audience is like so important to shared experience. And it feels like, I think what I'm learning in this conversation, as somebody who like, is like, you know, to my kids, like, no screen time, you know, like whatever, like as that guy. No, I mean, actually I think we're pretty lucky. We're like, you know, whatever. So far, it's just like, we got a lot of books happening in our house. But that, you know, I haven't thought about the idea that in this virtual space, a lot of people are thinking about who's on the other side of it in this other way. You know, I've been thinking about it in terms of real human sharing a space, but the fact that you can think about it in these virtual terms as well. It's a different community. I feel like, you know, yeah. Well, I mean, this maybe leads us to another question, or just a big bag, I guess, a big bucket to speak about. You know, it feels like I have never been through an experience where I haven't been able to tell my kids like, oh, you know, I've been through this. This is how it works or whatever, right? They've never come into a moment in their lives that I don't have some way of relating to, right? And so now we're all in this COVID moment, which nobody in the world has a way to relate to, right? And then 2 months into it, you add something where anybody in my generation has never experienced the Black Lives Matter movement to this degree as well, in terms of an awareness and kind of the energy that's with, I feel like older people, you can talk about the 60s and what that moment was like. And I'm sure there's an argument to be had over if it's the same or different, but just for me, I've never experienced either of these things. Right. So this conversation is happening in this moment that's just unlike anything I have been in. Right. So all of us as artists, I think, are responding to something that we've never had to deal with. Like what has been either of you, both of you, or just collectively as MEDIAQUEER, what has that conversation been like about making art and making work in this 2020 wildness,
I think I remember talking to, like, one of the first conversations we had when we got in that first rehearsal when I got back, was kind of about both of our shared kind of disease paranoia, but it wasn't because of COVID. Like COVID was kind of resurfacing these kinds of fears that we had as gay men worrying about AIDS. We were like that was the thing of like, oh yeah, like we could have sex with this guy and we could use like all the protection, but then still afterwards kind of be like, okay, am I okay? Am I, like, just like in the back of your head? And then kind of comparing that to like, oh, I just went to the grocery store. I had my mask on. Am I okay? Like that kind of same thing. And I think a lot of like our familiarity from everything that's kind of going on in our lives right now kind of comes from like the only reason that we have any semblance of familiarity is because we both kind of had that same shared gay experience.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's also the fact that same feeling does kind of come with being Black in America, because there's always this creeping, the am I okay question is like a really succinct way to put it, actually. Like, anytime cops come around, it's just like, am I okay? Am I doing the right things? Am I wearing the right thing? Am I smiling the right way? What do I have to do? Just this whole list comes up with things that I know that I should not do, and things that would be risky to do, and things that I probably should do, which is usually just like kind of shut down and like be very small. I don't know. It was interesting when all this started. I remember having a lot of conversations with straight people around me and being like, this kind of feels the same as like gay people being concerned about AIDS, and they'd be like, no, that doesn't make sense, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, no, it kind of really does, because like there's no way to know until you're tested. Also, it's like extremely deadly. You don't know if you gave it to someone, you could get symptomatic, blah, blah, blah. Wow. And then when BLM happened, I was like, yeah, right, there's this too. Of course, I actually had forgotten for a bit because those first couple months of quarantine were oddly, darkly peaceful. And I was like, oh yeah, there's this thing too. There's never been a shelter-in-place order for being Black, even though there definitely could have been this whole time, because evidently anything you do outside your home or in your home can get you killed, which is dark, but it's like info that our parents give to us very early. I don't know, I think my mom started preparing me for that between the ages of like 5 and 7. Just being like, soon going to be old enough for this to just be a reality, and we have to discuss it and like really address it and be on top of it. So I don't know, it's I guess to relate it back to art, for me personally, I've found that there's a pretty substantial gap. Of course, there's always been a gap in classical music of like the experiences that are in those of honestly still white men. Now women are being more recognized, which is really important. And as of like literally now, Black people and like people of other experiences are being more recognized. But there's this gap in music for processing. I'm sure we all have this experience, right? Of like, if you get really upset or if you ever got really emotional in high school, you would go and play this one piece you had that was like really aggressive and loud or something and use it to kind of get out your energy or something. And that's great. I would go to like Vivaldi's Summer Storm, I guess. But the truth of the matter is that piece doesn't actually address the police lynchings of Black people in broad daylight in America. So I was like, well, then I should probably start making these pieces so that people can actually process it quite literally. And also so that people have to keep having these conversations even once the world gets bored of this conversation on social media, which is inevitable because we've seen it happen before.
Yeah.
And with MEDIAQUEER, we kind of talked about, like, it goes back to what you're saying, or what you said earlier, Jason, about like really taking the audience into consideration, like that being an important part of our process, because we always kind of ask ourselves at the beginning, who are we writing this for? What do we want to do for them? And how serious should we be? How much do we want this thing to matter? You know? Yeah. It's just,
Man, I find it striking and awesome, the shared experience you have around speaking as to gay men responding to AIDS. I think, I mean, to me, I felt like that was a generational. I think, to be honest, I think I felt like it was almost generational, right? That there'd be older gay men that was very much on their mind in the 90s or something. And I think I didn't right. I didn't, or in the 2000s, like I didn't realize that was such a conversation right now. But I will say I had, in a very different, not pretending to have any similar experience, but I had the thought when one of the first people close to me had COVID and shared that they 2 weeks into, like after they had been over it in quarantine, shared it in a way that was, it almost felt that way. There was almost like a some kind of embarrassment to it or something, right? And then there was a feeling like they had to say it.
Yeah.
Because I think at the time, nobody knew what the transmission scene was like, maybe, even though I hadn't been seeing this person. There was like all these things surrounded it that felt like ways that I'd heard about that conversation. So it's very striking to hear you both share that. I hadn't thought about that in that similar way. But then the other thing you said, I mean, I feel like so I'm going to apologize ahead of time, but just like I feel like I'm mapping these amazing things that you all have said and trying to map it on to some very different experience that I'm having. But the thing that is happening in community that looks like me, so white fathers that are 5 years ago, maybe around Trayvon Martin, everybody learned what the talk was. White parents learned what the talk was and learned that, like, oh wow, there's something that a black father or black mother has to learn to give their child, and I've never heard of this. Now I've heard of it, and then now it's like, oh wow, I'm explaining to my kids that I don't have to tell them this. Like imagine, like they're old enough now where they can, like, go into a store on their own and buy something, or go, like we were at the beach and they could bike and go get a gumball for themselves, right? And come back, right? Like totally 7 and 9 year old white girls going to buy gumballs, and then trying to explain to them, like, wait a minute, like that was so easy for us all to make that decision. Like what, and trying to responsibly have that conversation with a 7 and 9 year old, mostly so I can learn almost, but also to responsibly explain to them that, Darren, before you went and bought a gumball, that your discussion with your mother or father may have been very, very different. Yeah. I really appreciate, I appreciate, it feels like, there are so many different people in our lives that are able to share experiences in different ways. And, Fong, I really appreciate you starting the conversation and sharing your experience. And Darren, I've always known you as somebody that has been so gracious in sharing your experience. But also through music, I have to say, we revisited the piece you wrote for us when you were at SOCI, Stefan Clark. And I have to say, besides the piece of music, the way you framed that piece of music with the audience, I don't know if you remember, and I don't know if something that you would do each time, or if this was, and this was a premiere, but just getting the audience to count 20?
Yeah.
Getting the audience to count to 20 together in a very happy, we are all having fun counting to 20. And then having the audience realize that was the number of gunshots that the police murdered Stefan Clark with. Mm-hmm. And then dropping the mic and leaving without framing it. I mean, it was like such a wonderfully powerful way, and I would say giving way to kind of frame some of these conversations. So, man, thanks for
the point, right? Like, it's never, my ministry is that I'm not really trying to attack anyone with this info. I it's always upsetting and disappointing, sure, whenever, like, at the beginning of this last time, when everyone was acting surprised, and they're like, oh my god, what's happening? And the whole of the Black community was just like, really? Really? You're gonna act surprised. But then once I personally process that and get past it, it's like, I'm not trying to berate people, I really just want to get us all on the same page, because I think then we'll be able to actually work forward. And the fact of the matter with Simon Clark is that you can color it with rhetoric however you want, I guess, evidently. But the truth is that this person was shot 20 times. 20 is a massive number for being shot. So if we just count to 20 together, then I think we all understand that's not good and unnecessary and wrong. It's not at all what has to happen. And I don't know, I've just found that, like, reducing things to their austere dative form has proved very helpful in those types of conversations.
Yeah, awesome.
There is for, like, I guess this is an interesting place in which Fong and I are kind of opposite, actually, but in a really beautiful way, I found, because, like, with our piece Into, right, it's sort of doing the same thing, because it's using text from Grindr messages, right? But it ends with, like, screaming and noise and, like, all this very extreme emotion, which I think is actually the best way to convey that message. And part of that does come from people knowing us, I guess, personally.
Yeah.
Right?
It's
like,
and that with the thing with that kind of text, like the reason that you're pointing out that it's super opposite is that you're, like, with your Stephen Clark piece, you're taking, like, a very emotional moment and then kind of distilling it down into data and then having people kind of reprocess that. And then what we did with Into was taking very like plain text. Yeah, it's very, like, cold, like, these are the things that I am into. Are you also into these things, like, sexually on Grindr? And then kind of pointing pointing that in a very emotional context of, like, you're putting these things in a very blasé way, but these things hurt. Like, these things have emotional weight behind them.
So they're opposite in terms of the maybe end result, but they're the same in terms of, like, taking something and showing the flip side of the content or something.
Yeah. Like, they both achieve the same goal, but we're going about it, like, in the opposite direction.
Really quick, before we move on to the fifth question, I don't know if this happened after we press record or before we press record, but you a little bit described yourselves as opposites in a lot of ways, or, like, working together in a great way, because you know that, I mean, I that resonates with me for sure. I mean, I don't play in a duo so much as a quartet, but, you know, everybody, you know, we're not for the same people. Everybody has their different space that they. So what are your, well, like, what? Like, I don't know the right way to answer the question.
I mean,
what are the characteristics or what are the qualities that complement each other?
I mean, immediately, like, Darian is, like, the super social one out of the two of us. Like I'm, like, the shy kid in the corner, and then Darian is like, hi, yes, I'm gonna be friends with everyone in this room immediately. We're best friends. And I'm like, hi. How are you?
Let's take this step by step.
Yeah.
But then musically, is there a similar
well, I mean,
would you follow that line musically?
Console is in a minor key for sure. Mine's in a major key. And, like, I don't know, whenever I describe our music, I always tell people, like, take my, like, flowers and glitter and, like, toss them in concrete and acid, and that's kind of the vibe. But I think that's, like, where we both live aesthetically, sort of.
Yeah.
It's, like, maybe for me, it's, like, finding the weight and gravity of those elements, and, like, how can I make these things that are really beautiful and bright actually very emotionally compelling and not feel so vapid. Whereas Fong is like, how can I create these spaces with these maybe harsh elements, even, like, sonically, things that are just very austere ways, but make a space that's extremely nostalgic and round out of it, you know, which I think for a lot of reasons could not work. But with us, maybe because of so many touch points of reference in our pasts ends up coming together really well to make a well-rounded perspective on like any given thing that we're trying to tackle.
I feel like so many, I would say creatively, so much of the time when you have something that just shouldn't work, then when it does, it's exceptional, right? So I feel like you're like you're starting from this base of like, these two things should not work. Whoa, we got MEDIAQUEER. This is amazing. Well, in our last question, we can pivot to a very different space. I feel like, you know, in the quarantine COVID kind of moment, right, we're missing so much the kind of playing shows for people in real moments. I had asked this for a long time since I started this podcast, just like if folks had any kind of like memorable or fun or terrible like kind of concert experiences, you know, like for our touchstones are usually you know, the shit that just went drastically wrong, you know, or like the, you know, like, you know, a musical instrument, like breaking things, or like, you know, like those kind of like, you know, very like, you know, we have those memorable moments, but we also have, you know, more transcendent, you know, optimistic, idealistic, wonderful performance moments. Since we're like kind of so far away from any performance moment right now, do you either as MEDIAQUEER or as Phong and Darian have a memorable concert experience to you know, get us out on?
I think the biggest one in my head right now is when we did Into for the first time at Bang in a Can. And it was like here we are yelling about things that we would have to bleep on this podcast to a room full of like like middle-aged to older, like the blue-haired white audience.
So this is at Bengal. This is at Mass Mocha at the
awesome. Last summer. And then I think even for the rehearsals for that, we were kind of we like set ourselves up in like this kind of classroom-ish auditorium space that had like a PA setup, and then it's like kind of a big-ish room, and it's just the two of us, and then like we were like the last two people in the building or something, and the janitor kind of comes in and is like sweeping things as we're like yelling obscenities over the PA.
That's good. That's like you gotta, are you this into it? Do you believe in what you're doing enough to be doing it right now? And this poor janitor is like just trying to do his jam. Jam. That's great. I can picture that. It's great, Phong.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the one. Because there was also one where we, I don't know, that felt like a real step forward in our composing together. So it was like, oh, here's a really succinct, pointed idea that we're doing. In front of all of our, feared mentors. Not really feared, but like the people that we respected enough to be concerned about like if they really didn't respect this or not. But fortunately, they did respect it. And received it. And also a lot of people responded favorably to it, which was really, for me, kind of surprising. Not because I didn't believe in the work, but just because like context, you know.
Right, like who we were presenting it to was like this, like we know we're presenting this to a space that might not be the most welcoming to it, but that's kind of why we're doing this. Like we wanted to kind of confront that, like you. So the main thing of the piece is like racial prejudices on dating apps, and then here we are, kind of like addressing that to a room full of people that probably have never had to confront that issue ever. So whether or not we knew that was going to kind of read, especially with how aggressive we were taking the content.
Yeah.
Man, I love that. That sounds like a, I mean, you know, knowing Darian's work mostly through Soci at first, getting to know your work through Soci, and then learning about your work together in MEDIAQUEER, it does seem like that's one very powerful way when race is taken on through these other lenses. I don't know, the duo that was presented at Soci of yours, Darian, Kid
Kid
Gunner.
Gunner.
I forget that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Feels like a very similar thing in terms of like, I don't know, following the way I'm imagining when you're, if I was at Mass Mocha, the way I'm imagining that is that maybe the first thing I would be confronted with is like, okay, I didn't meet Beth on a dating app. I'm pre-dating apps. I've never been on Grindr. What is it about? Right, we're talking about race. Fuck, you know, like I'm dealing with this one thing, and then like,
Right.
no, actually, we're talking about this. You know, that those kind of moments feel really powerful in the way that I can see both of you all presenting some of these pretty heavy topics. Well, your new jam that we're gonna hear on Thursday,
Yeah.
August
What is time
27th.
anymore?
It's at 7 p.m. I've discovered it's at 7 p.m. Yeah, which is cool. I didn't know that. It's at 7 p.m., not 8 p.m. It's at 7 p.m. It's on all the places like YouTube and the Facebook and the sopercussion.com. Is there a title yet that we should be getting out into the world?
It's a nod to the coding behind it, but it's called "If True, Return False."
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Would this be considered a premiere?
Yeah. And all the
Love it.
video that's used is either stuff that I captured in Virginia, or in the mountains, wherever I was, or it's coding that follows it, which is like a lot of the latter part of the video. And it's kind of in these two spaces, right? Like one space of floating, which feels like the kind of the quarantine time, I guess. And then the time of just rushing into whatever's happening right now.
Whatever this netherworld that we're in, this is still that,
Yeah.
but not that.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm very pumped about it. I imagine you all, if you can be, will be there experiencing this all real time on the chat, which is it's a good thing to do right now. I really appreciate you two human beings and the fact that you made time to talk to me about the stuff and the fact that you're presenting new work in Brooklyn Bound. It's very, very cool. You're awesome. See you there.
Yeah.
See you there. Is that where I'm going to see you next?
Here?
On the internet.
See you there or on the internet in this Zoom room. See you back in the Zoom room. Only two friends I have who've ever met on Zoom. Awesome. I'll see you guys soon. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Bye.